Maddox Alexander had tested 23 women in 2 years, 23 dates where his card declined, where he wore thrift store clothes, where he drove a car held together by rust and prayers. After his ex-wife left him the moment his money dipped, Maddox made a vow: never be loved for his wealth again. 23 women failed. Then he met Rachel, a waitress drowning in medical bills, working doubles just to keep her sick mother alive. When his card was rejected, Rachel didn't blink. She pulled out $47 in crumpled tips and paid without a word. 3 dates later, she passed every test. But tonight, watching her laugh despite the exhaustion in her eyes, Maddox realized something terrifying. What if she passed, and then hated him for ever making her prove she was worthy? Before we continue, let us know in the comment section where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach, and if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Maddox Alexander had built an empire from nothing. At 38, he owned a chain of boutique hotels stretching across 12 states, employed over 3,000 people, and had a net worth that most people couldn't comprehend. But none of that mattered when he looked at the framed photo on his nightstand, his 6-year-old daughter Alice, smiling with her 2 front teeth missing. She was the reason he did everything, and she was the reason he trusted no one. 3 years ago, Maddox had been married to a woman named Victoria, blonde, beautiful, born into old money. She had loved him fiercely when his business was thriving, but when a bad investment temporarily wiped out 30% of his portfolio, Victoria filed for divorce within 6 weeks. She didn't just want out of the marriage, she wanted Alice. "You can't provide her the lifestyle she deserves," Victoria had said in court, her voice cold and rehearsed. "A child needs stability." Maddox had fought back with everything he had. He won custody, but the victory left scars that money couldn't heal. His ex-wife hadn't loved him. She had loved what he represented: security, status, a certain kind of life. The moment that life seemed threatened, she was gone. After the divorce, Maddox made a promise to himself. If he ever loved again, it would be real. Not based on his bank account, not based on the penthouse or the private jet or the name recognition. He needed to know with absolute certainty that whoever he let into his life, into Alice's life, would stay, even if everything disappeared. So he created the test. It was simple in design, but brutal in execution. He would show up to blind dates dressed in clothes from thrift stores. He would drive a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and torn seats. He would take women to modest restaurants, and when the bill came, his credit card would be declined. Not because he couldn't pay, but because he had programmed it that way. 23 women, 23 dates over nearly 2 years. Some laughed nervously and offered to split the bill before never returning his calls. Others looked at him with barely concealed disgust, making excuses to leave early. A few made it to the second date, where he would bring them to a small rented apartment instead of his mansion. They never made it to the third. Not one of them had ever met Alice. That was the final test, the one no woman had earned the right to take. Then Rachel Johnson walked into his life. She wasn't supposed to be his date that night. Maddox had been set up by a mutual friend with someone else entirely, but the original woman had canceled last minute. Rachel was the replacement, a friend of a friend, someone who had reluctantly agreed to fill in. When Maddox arrived at the diner, he spotted her immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, still wearing her work uniform, a simple black polo, jeans, and a worn apron she hadn't had time to remove. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many hours and too little sleep. She looked exhausted, but when she saw him approach, she straightened up and offered a genuine smile. "You must be Maddox," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Rachel. Sorry about the outfit. I came straight from my shift." "No apology needed," Maddox replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Long day?" Rachel laughed, softly. Long week, long month, honestly. But I'm here now. They talked for 2 hours. Rachel worked as a waitress at a family restaurant across town, pulling double shifts 6 days a week. She didn't offer this information as a complaint, just a fact of her life, stated without self-pity. Maddox found himself drawn to the way she spoke, direct and unguarded. She asked questions about him too, but they weren't the usual questions he received. She didn't ask what he did for a living or where he lived. She asked what he liked to read, whether he believed in second chances, what made him laugh. When the bill came, Maddox reached for his wallet. The waiter ran his card and returned with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, sir. It was declined." This was the moment. The first test. Maddox watched Rachel's face carefully, waiting for the familiar flicker of judgment, the subtle shift in body language that signaled retreat. It never came. Instead, Rachel reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small stack of bills, ones and fives, crumpled and worn. She counted them quickly and placed them on the table. $47, she said. That should cover it. Maddox stared at the money. He knew what $47 meant to someone like her. That was groceries. That was gas. That was the difference between making rent and falling short. "Rachel, I can't let you—" "You can pay me back whenever," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Or never. I know what it feels like to be judged for being broke." Those words hit Maddox like a physical blow. She wasn't performing generosity for show. She meant it. And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: shame. He drove her home that night in his beat-up Civic, and she didn't comment on the car. She didn't ask why a grown man was driving something that belonged in a junkyard. When he pulled up to her apartment building, a modest complex with peeling paint and a flickering entrance light, she turned to him with a tired smile. "I had a nice time," she said. "Really. Can I see you again?" The question came out before Maddox could stop it. Rachel studied his face for a long moment. "Yeah, I'd like that." The second date took place a week later. Maddox picked her up in the same car and brought her to his rented apartment. A one-bedroom unit in a working-class neighborhood, sparsely furnished and deliberately unremarkable. Rachel walked in and looked around. Her eyes landed on the wall above the couch, where Maddox had hung 3 of Alice's drawings, crayon sketches of stick figures and lopsided houses. "Your daughter made these?" she asked. Maddox nodded. "She's 6. Thinks she's going to be a famous artist someday." Rachel moved closer to examine the drawings. "She's got a good eye for color. This one here?" She pointed to a drawing of a purple sky over an orange house. "Most kids would make the sky blue. She sees things differently." It was such a small observation, but it struck Maddox deeply. 23 women, and not one of them had ever looked at Alice's drawings. Not one had asked about his daughter beyond surface-level politeness. They spent the evening cooking dinner together in his tiny kitchen, pasta with jarred sauce, nothing fancy. Rachel moved through the space comfortably, not seeming to notice or care about the cramped quarters. She told him about her mother, who was battling cancer and couldn't work anymore. She told him about the medical bills piling up, the debt that felt like a weight she could never lift. "I had a boyfriend once," Rachel said quietly, stirring the pasta. "When my mom got sick, he left. Said he didn't want his life dragged down by my baggage." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "His exact words. Baggage." Maddox felt his chest tighten. He was an idiot. Maybe. Or maybe he was just honest about what he could handle. Rachel shrugged, but Maddox could see the old wound beneath her casual tone. "Either way, I learned something. I don't need someone rich. I just need someone who won't run when things get hard." The third date was the test Maddox had never administered before. He introduced Rachel to Alice. He told himself it was necessary, that this was the final checkpoint, the ultimate verification of a woman's character. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted them to meet. He wanted to see Rachel in his real world, even if she didn't know it was real. They met at a park near his rented apartment. Alice was shy at first, hiding behind Maddox's leg and peeking out at the stranger. Rachel didn't push. She didn't crouch down and force conversation or try too hard to win the child over. Instead, she simply sat on a bench, pulled out a small sketchbook she had brought, and began to draw. Alice watched from a distance, curiosity gradually overcoming her shyness. After 10 minutes, she inched closer. After 20, she was sitting beside Rachel, watching her sketch. "What are you drawing?" Alice asked. "A dragon," Rachel replied. "But I'm not very good at wings. Want to help me?" Alice took the pencil Rachel offered and began adding her own details. Flowers around the dragon's feet, a tiny crown on its head. Rachel praised each addition with genuine enthusiasm, and soon Alice was chattering away, telling Rachel about her favorite colors and her teacher at school, and the book she was reading about a princess who saved herself. When Rachel prepared to leave, Alice tugged on her sleeve and handed her a piece of paper. She had torn a page from Rachel's sketchbook and drawn something while Rachel wasn't looking. 3 stick figures holding hands under a purple sky. At the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, Alice had written, "Alice's family." Rachel's breath caught. She looked at Maddox, then back at the drawing, then at the little girl staring up at her with hopeful eyes. "Will you come back?" Alice asked. Rachel knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Do you want me to come back?" Alice nodded. "Then I will." As Maddox drove Rachel home that evening, she was quiet, gazing out the window at the passing streetlights. Finally, she spoke. "She's wonderful, Maddox. You've done an amazing job with her." "She likes you," Maddox replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "She doesn't warm up to people easily." "Neither do I." Rachel smiled faintly. "I guess we understand each other." That night, after dropping Rachel off, Maddox sat alone in his car outside her apartment building for a long time. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing. She had passed every test. The declined card, the shabby apartment, the meeting with his daughter. Rachel hadn't flinched at any of it. She had been kind, genuine, and real in a way that Maddox had stopped believing existed. But that was the problem. Because now Maddox faced a choice he hadn't anticipated. He could continue the charade, keep playing the role of a struggling single father, keep hiding behind his manufactured poverty. Or he could tell her the truth and risk losing everything. If he told her, she might leave. Not because of the money, but because of the deception. She might feel used, manipulated, reduced to a test subject in his experiment against heartbreak. And if she left, she would take something with her that Maddox couldn't afford to lose. Not just his chance at love, but Alice's fragile hope for a family. He thought about the drawing his daughter had given Rachel. 3 stick figures under a purple sky labeled Alice's family. Maddox closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. The weeks that followed were the happiest Maddox had known since before his divorce. Rachel came over nearly every evening after her shifts, bringing leftovers from the restaurant or picking up groceries to cook dinner together in his cramped kitchen. Alice began waiting by the window each night, watching for Rachel's car, and the moment she arrived, the little girl would run to the door with arms outstretched. But with every passing day, the lies grew heavier. Rachel asked once what Maddox did for work. He told her he was a manager at a small hotel downtown. Technically true if you ignored the fact that he owned the entire chain. She asked about his family, and he mentioned his mother lived nearby, but kept the details vague. When she wondered aloud about his future plans, whether he wanted to grow in his career or try something new, Maddox deflected with half answers and changed the subject. Each lie was small on its own, but together they formed a wall between them. A wall Rachel couldn't see, but Maddox felt every time she looked at him with trust in her eyes. One evening, his mother called. Dorothy Alexander was a woman who had raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom apartment in the roughest part of Detroit. She had worked 2 jobs for most of her life, scrimped and saved to send Maddox to college, and watched with fierce pride as he built his empire from nothing. But Dorothy was also practical to a fault, and she had opinions about everything, especially her son's love life. "I heard you've been seeing someone," Dorothy said without preamble. "A waitress." Maddox sighed. "How did you hear about that?" "I have my sources. Maddox, honey, I'm not trying to interfere." "Then don't." Dorothy ignored him. "I just think you should keep your options open. The Henderson's daughter, Camille, you remember her? She graduated from Yale Law, works at a firm in Manhattan now. Beautiful girl, smart, from a good family. Mom, I'm not interested in being set up. It's just a dinner, 3 weeks from Saturday. The Hendersons are coming to town for a charity gala, and I already told them you'd join us." Dorothy's voice softened slightly. "I know Victoria hurt you, but not every woman is like her, and Alice deserves a mother who can—" "Alice has me," Maddox cut in. "That's enough." "Is it?" Dorothy asked quietly. "Or is that just what you tell yourself?" After the call ended, Maddox sat alone in his rented apartment, staring at the wall where Alice's drawings hung. His mother wasn't wrong. Alice did deserve more than a father who worked too much and trusted too little. But Dorothy's solution, marrying someone from the right background, someone vetted and approved, felt like trading one kind of cage for another. Rachel wasn't from the right background. She didn't have a Yale degree or family connections or a trust fund. But when she walked through the door, Alice lit up in a way Maddox had never seen before. That had to mean something. 2 weeks later, Rachel was at the apartment for a movie night. Alice had picked the film, an animated story about a princess who saved her kingdom without a prince, and the 3 of them sat together on the worn couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn. Alice had positioned herself between the 2 adults, her small body leaning against Rachel's side, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Halfway through the movie, Alice fell asleep. Maddox moved to carry her to bed, but Rachel shook her head. "Let me," she whispered. Maddox watched as Rachel lifted his daughter gently, cradling her against her chest. Alice stirred but didn't wake, her arms instinctively wrapping around Rachel's neck. Something in Maddox's chest cracked open at the sight. He followed them to Alice's small bedroom and stood in the doorway as Rachel tucked the blanket around the sleeping child. For a moment, everything was still. Then Alice whimpered, her face twisting in the grip of some dream. "Mommy," she murmured. "Mommy, don't go." Rachel froze. She looked at Maddox, uncertainty flickering across her face. He nodded once, giving her permission he wasn't sure he had the right to give. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and began to stroke Alice's hair. She started humming softly, a lullaby Maddox didn't recognize, something slow and tender. Alice's whimpering subsided, her breathing evened out, and then Rachel leaned down and whispered something so quietly that Maddox almost didn't hear it. "I'm not your mommy, sweetheart, but I'm here. I promise I'm here." Maddox stepped back from the doorway, his throat tight. He walked to the kitchen and gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady himself. Rachel wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress him or pass some test. She was simply loving his daughter, openly, honestly, without expectation of reward. And he was lying to her every single day. When Rachel emerged from Alice's room a few minutes later, she found Maddox standing by the window, staring out at the parking lot below. "She's asleep," Rachel said softly. "I think she was dreaming about her mom." Maddox nodded, but didn't turn around. Rachel moved closer, standing beside him. "You never talk about her. Victoria, I mean. What happened between you 2? It was a fair question. Rachel had shared her own pain, and Maddox had given her almost nothing in return. "She left when things got hard," he said finally. "I made a bad investment. Lost a lot of money, temporarily, but she didn't wait to find out. Filed for divorce and tried to take Alice with her. He let out a bitter laugh. She said I couldn't provide the lifestyle our daughter deserved, as if love could be measured in square footage. Rachel was quiet for a moment. That must have been awful. It was. But the worst part wasn't losing the money or even the marriage. It was realizing that she never saw me. She saw what I could give her. The moment that changed, I became worthless. Rachel reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, slightly rough from years of work. You're not worthless, Maddox. And for what it's worth, I don't care about any of that. I know you don't. The words came out before Maddox could stop them, heavy with meaning he couldn't explain. Rachel tilted her head, studying his face. Then why do you look so sad? Because I'm doing the same thing to you, he thought. I'm measuring your worth. I'm testing you, and you have no idea. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he squeezed her hand and forced a smile. Just tired? It's been a long week. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. The following Sunday, Maddox took Alice to visit his mother. Dorothy lived in a spacious house in the suburbs now, a gift from Maddox after his first major success. She had resisted at first, claiming she didn't need charity, but eventually relented when Maddox pointed out that the house had a big backyard where Alice could play. While Alice ran outside to chase butterflies, Maddox sat with his mother in the living room. Dorothy was flipping through a stack of magazines, making small talk about the neighborhood and her book club. Then she stopped on a page and smiled. Look at this. They did a feature on the new hotel in Charleston. You look so handsome in this photo. She held up the magazine, a business publication with Maddox on the cover, wearing a tailored suit and standing in front of one of his properties. The headline read, Maddox Alexander H., the self-made billionaire redefining luxury hospitality. Maddox barely glanced at it. Mom, can you put that away? I don't want... But he was too late. Alice had wandered back inside, a butterfly temporarily forgotten. She stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the magazine in her grandmother's hands. Daddy? She said, her voice small and confused. Why are you wearing fancy clothes? And why is our house so big in the picture? Maddox's heart stopped. Dorothy looked between her son and granddaughter, realization dawning on her face. Maddox, what is going on? Why doesn't Alice know about... Not now, Mom. Maddox crossed the room quickly, kneeling in front of his daughter. Alice, sweetheart, that's just a picture. It's for work. It doesn't mean anything. But Alice's brow was furrowed, the way it always got when she was working through a problem. But Grandma's house is big, and you said we live in a small apartment because we don't have a lot of money. She looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. Did you lie to me, Daddy? The question hit Maddox like a punch to the gut. He had told himself the deception was necessary. He had convinced himself that keeping Alice in the dark was protecting her, maintaining the illusion until he found someone worthy of knowing the truth. But standing here now, watching his 6-year-old daughter grapple with the realization that her father had lied, Maddox understood something he had been avoiding for months. He wasn't just deceiving Rachel. He was teaching his daughter that dishonesty was acceptable when it served your purposes. He was modeling the very behavior he claimed to despise. Alice, he said carefully, Daddy made a mistake. I was trying to protect us, but I did it the wrong way. I'm sorry. Alice considered this for a long moment. Are you going to tell Rachel the truth? Maddox stared at his daughter. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive she was, how much she absorbed even when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Yes, he said. I'm going to tell her. Good, Alice nodded solemnly, because lying is bad. You told me that. That night, Maddox made a decision. He couldn't keep living this double life. The weight of the deception was crushing him, and worse, it was seeping into every part of his existence, his relationship with Rachel, his role as a father, his own sense of who he was. He called Rachel and asked her to come over the next evening, but not to the apartment. He gave her a different address, the address of his real home. Rachel arrived at 7 o'clock. Maddox watched through the window as her car pulled up to the gate, hesitating before the massive iron entrance. She called him, confusion evident in her voice. "Maddox, I think I have the wrong address. This can't be right." "It's right," he said. "I'll buzz you in." The driveway was long, winding through manicured gardens and past a fountain before reaching the main house, a sprawling estate with floor-to-ceiling windows and architecture that had been featured in design magazines. Rachel parked her old sedan and stepped out, staring up at the building with an expression Maddox couldn't read. He met her at the front door. "What is this?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maddox, whose house is this?" "Mine." She looked at him, then back at the house, then at him again. "I don't understand." "I know. Come inside. Please. I need to explain." He led her through the foyer, past the grand staircase and the artwork on the walls, into a sitting room that was larger than her entire apartment. Rachel stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the chandelier and the view of the swimming pool through the French doors. "You're rich," she said flatly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How rich?" Maddox took a breath. "I own a chain of boutique hotels, 37 properties across 12 states. My net worth is somewhere around $1.2 billion. Rachel said nothing. Her face had gone very still, the way it did when she was processing something difficult. "The apartment," she said slowly. "The car, the credit card that got declined." She looked at him, and Maddox saw the moment understanding clicked into place. "It was all fake. You were testing me." "Yes." "How many women?" Her voice was steady, but Maddox could hear the tremor beneath it. "How many women did you do this to before me?" 23. Rachel let out a short, sharp laugh, not amused, just hollow. 23, and I'm number 24, the experiment that finally worked. "Rachel, please let me explain." "Explain what?" She turned to face him fully, and now he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "That you've been lying to me for months? That every moment I thought was real, every dinner in that tiny kitchen, every night on that awful couch, every time I looked at you and thought maybe I'd finally found someone who saw me. It was all just a test?" "The feelings were real," Maddox said desperately. "Everything I felt for you, everything between us, that was never fake. But the foundation was." Rachel's voice cracked. "You built this relationship on a lie, Maddox. You watched me count out my tip money to pay for a dinner you could have bought 100 times over. You let me believe we were equals, two people struggling through life together. And the whole time, you were judging me, evaluating whether I was good enough to pass your little test. I was trying to protect myself, and Alice, after what happened with Victoria." "I'm not Victoria!" Rachel's shout echoed through the cavernous room. "I never asked you for anything. I never cared about your money because I didn't know you had any. And you know what the worst part is? I would have loved you anyway. Rich or poor, it wouldn't have mattered. But you never gave me the chance to prove that honestly. You had to turn it into a game." Maddox reached for her, but she stepped back. "I grew up poor," Rachel said, her voice dropping to something raw and wounded. "My whole life, people looked at me and saw what I didn't have. And now you made me prove I wasn't a gold digger. You put me through test after test, watching to see if I'd fail. How is that any different from what my ex did? You both looked at me and saw someone who needed to be evaluated before she could be trusted. Rachel, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong." "You were." She nodded, her jaw tight. "And I need to leave now." Please don't go. Please, just let me. Let you what? Explain more? Apologize more? Rachel shook her head. I need time, Maddox. I need to figure out if there's anything left to salvage here or if the whole thing was just a beautiful lie. She walked toward the door, then stopped. When she turned back, her expression was the saddest thing Maddox had ever seen. I promised Alice I'd be there for her. That wasn't a test, and it wasn't a lie. It was real. So whatever happens between us, I need you to tell her that I didn't abandon her. I need her to know that. Then she was gone. Maddox stood alone in his enormous house, surrounded by everything money could buy and feeling emptier than he ever had in his life. After a while, he walked upstairs to Alice's room. She was staying at Dorothy's for the night, but her drawings were still pinned to the wall, dragons with crooked wings, houses under purple skies, and there, in the corner, the picture she had drawn at the park. 3 stick figures holding hands labeled Alice's family. He had ruined everything. Not because he was poor, and not because he was rich, but because he had been so afraid of being hurt that he had hurt someone else instead. Someone innocent, someone kind, someone who had never asked for anything except honesty. He sank onto his daughter's small bed and buried his face in his hands. Tomorrow, Alice would come home. She would ask where Rachel was, and Maddox would have to find the words to explain that sometimes, when you spend your whole life building walls to protect yourself, you end up locking out the very people you were trying to keep close. The days after Rachel left were the longest of Maddox's life. Alice came home from Dorothy's the next morning, and the first thing she asked was where Rachel was. Maddox knelt down and told her the truth, or as much of it as a 6-year-old could understand. He explained that he had made a mistake, that he had kept secrets from Rachel, and that she needed some time alone to think. Alice listened quietly, her small face serious. When he finished, she asked only one question. Is she coming back? Maddox couldn't answer. Over the following week, Alice grew quieter than Maddox had ever seen her. She stopped waiting by the window in the evenings. She stopped asking to watch movies or go to the park. Most troubling of all, she stopped drawing. The crayons sat untouched in their box, and the sketchbook Rachel had given her remained closed on her desk. Maddox tried everything. He suggested they bake cookies together, or visit the zoo, or drive to the beach. Alice agreed to each activity without enthusiasm, going through the motions, but never truly present. At night, Maddox could hear her talking softly to herself in bed, and once he caught the words that broke his heart. I miss you, Rachel. Please come back. His mother called multiple times, reminding him about the charity gala and the Hendersons' daughter. Maddox finally snapped during the 4th call. I'm not going, Mom. I'm not interested in Camille Henderson or anyone else you want to set me up with. Dorothy was silent for a moment. This is about the waitress, isn't it? Maddox, I know you think you had something real with her, but her name is Rachel. And yes, it was real. The realest thing I've had since Alice was born. Maddox ran a hand over his face. I destroyed it. I lied to her for months, tested her like she was applying for a job instead of falling in love. And now she's gone, and Alice won't draw anymore, and I don't know how to fix any of it. The line was quiet. When Dorothy spoke again, her voice had softened. Then maybe you should stop trying to fix it and just be honest. Write to her. Tell her everything you just told me. If she's the woman you think she is, she'll at least hear you out. After hanging up, Maddox sat at his desk for a long time. His mother was right. He had spent so long constructing tests and walls and defenses that he had forgotten how to simply be vulnerable. Rachel had given him her whole self, her struggles, her fears, her wounded heart, and he had given her calculations in return. He couldn't undo what he had done, but maybe he could offer her something he had never given anyone else, complete, unguarded honesty. He began to write. The letter wasn't long. Maddox didn't try to justify his actions or explain away his mistakes. He simply told her the truth, that he had been afraid, that his fear had made him cruel, and that he understood now what he had taken from her. He told her about Alice's silence, not to guilt her into returning, but because Rachel had asked him to let Alice know she hadn't been abandoned. It seemed only fair that Rachel should know the impact she had left behind. He ended the letter with words he had never spoken to anyone. "You told me once that you just needed someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. I want to be that person. Not because you passed my tests, but because you showed me what real love looks like. Patient, honest, unconditional. I don't deserve another chance. But if you ever decide to give me one, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. And Rachel, you were never a burden. You were never someone who needed to prove your worth. You were a gift. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to see that." Before sealing the envelope, Maddox went to Alice's room. His daughter was sitting on her bed, staring out the window at nothing. "Alice, I'm going to send a letter to Rachel. Would you like to send her something too?" For the first time in days, a spark of life flickered in Alice's eyes. She climbed off the bed, walked to her desk, and opened her sketchbook. Maddox watched as she selected her crayons carefully. Purple for the sky, green for the grass, brown and black for the figures. She worked in silence for nearly 20 minutes, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. When she finished, she held up the drawing. 3 figures stood under a purple sky, holding hands. But this time, the words at the bottom were different. "Miss Rachel, I miss you. Our family is missing you." Maddox felt his throat tighten. He took the drawing gently, placed it in the envelope with his letter, and mailed it that afternoon. Then he waited. Across town, Rachel was living in a fog. She went to work, took orders, smiled at customers, collected her tips. She went home, checked on her mother, made sure she took her medication. She lay in bed at night and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment with Maddox and Alice, trying to separate what had been real from what had been performance. The worst part was that she still loved him, despite everything. The lies, the manipulation, the months of calculated deception. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her when she sang Alice to sleep. She couldn't forget the sound of his voice when he told her about Victoria, the raw pain that no amount of money could mask. She couldn't erase the feeling of Alice's small arms around her neck, or the weight of the child's trust as she drifted off to sleep. But trust was exactly what Maddox had stolen from her. He had taken her most vulnerable moments and turned them into data points in his experiment. How could she ever believe anything he said again? The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Rachel had walked out of Maddox's mansion. She almost threw it away, unopened. But something made her hesitate. Perhaps the sight of her name written in his handwriting, or the slight bulge in the envelope that suggested it contained more than just paper. She sat down at her kitchen table and carefully tore it open. Alice's drawing fell out first. Rachel stared at the 3 figures under the purple sky, at the wobbly handwriting that spelled out, "Our family is missing you." Something cracked open inside her chest, and before she knew it, she was crying, deep, racking sobs that she couldn't control. She read Maddox's letter through blurred vision. He wasn't asking her to come back. He wasn't making promises or offering explanations. He was simply telling her the truth, finally, with nothing held back. And at the end, those words that seemed to reach through the page and wrap around her heart. "You were never a burden. You were a gift." Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not her ex-boyfriend, who had seen her struggles as obstacles. Not the parade of people who had looked at her circumstances and decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Maddox had lied to her for months, yes. But in this letter, in this moment, he was offering her something his deception had made impossible before. The chance to see who he really was. And who he really was, she realized, was a man who had been just as wounded as her. A man who had built walls because he didn't know any other way to survive. A man who had been wrong, deeply wrong, but who was finally brave enough to admit it. Rachel looked at Alice's drawing again. Then she made a decision. She drove to Maddox's estate the next evening. He answered the door himself, and the hope in his eyes was so raw that Rachel almost lost her nerve. But she had come to say something, and she was going to say it. "I didn't come back because of the letter," she began, "and I didn't come back because you're rich. I came back because Alice deserves to have someone who keeps their promises, and because you finally told me the truth, even though you knew it might not change anything." Maddox nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm not sure you do." Rachel took a breath. "I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. You took something from me that I can't get back. The innocence of those early months, the belief that what we had was built on honesty. But I've been thinking about what you wrote, about being afraid, and I realized something." She met his eyes. "I've been afraid too. Afraid to trust anyone. Afraid to believe I could be loved without conditions. The difference is, I never turned my fear into a weapon against someone else." "You're right," Maddox said quietly. "And I can't undo what I did. I can only promise to be different going forward." "That's not enough." Rachel's voice was firm. "I need more than promises. I need honesty every single day, even when it's hard. I need you to treat me like a partner, not a test subject. And I need you to understand that if you ever deceive me again about anything, I'm gone. For good." "I understand. There's one more thing." Rachel's expression softened slightly. "I don't want to be the poor girl who got saved by the billionaire. And I don't want you to be the wounded man who needed me to heal him. We start over as equals, or we don't start over at all." Maddox extended his hand. "Equals." Rachel looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. "Equals." 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Maddox and Rachel sat at the kitchen table in his estate, while Alice worked on a new drawing beside them. The house was different now, warmer somehow, filled with Rachel's touches. Her mother had moved into the guest house after her treatment improved, and the sound of her laughter could sometimes be heard drifting across the garden. Alice finished her drawing and held it up proudly. It showed 3 figures under a purple sky, just like before. But the words at the bottom had changed. "My family." Rachel's eyes glistened as she looked at the picture. Maddox reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me a chance to be real." Rachel squeezed his hand back. "Thank you for finally letting me see you." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, casting golden light through the windows. And in the kitchen of the big house that had once felt so empty, a family sat together, imperfect, healing, but finally built on something true,